Good day, everyone. So, for today, we are going to discuss the analysis of Iliad and the Odyssey from the lesson Mythology of Ancient Greece and Rome. So, before we discuss the analysis of the two, let us just first watch this video, the summary of Iliad, and of course, also later on the summary of Odyssey. Okay, give me a minute.
Zeus, the chief of gods and the immortal king of Mount Olympus, held a celebration in honor of the marriage of Peleus, fighting Eris, the goddess of chaos. It was in the middle of the feast and resentful. Therefore, so discord among gods, she threw a golden apple into the banquet, on which was written, "For the most goddesses demanded the apple: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, knowing that choosing one over the other two will result in more task to Paris, Prince of Troy, who had a reputation for being a fair judge among the gods. As each goddess wanted to have the showed themselves to Paris in all their beauty and appeared naked before him. Each of them then offered the prince a gift as an incentive in return for that. Promised him all the kingdoms of Europe and Asia Minor. Athena offered him wisdom in battle, and Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful Helen, queen of Sparta, who was already married to King Menelaus. Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite and asked for Helen's love in return. That when beautiful Helen came to age, every king and nobleman in the Greek world wanted to marry her. The competition became so fierce and avoid bloodshed, they made a pact that Helen herself shall choose her suitor, and she and her future husband must be both protected by the rest of the kingdoms. And Helen chose Menelaus. When Menelaus found out that in his absence young Paris had taken his wife, he raised a massive army from every corner of the Greek world and gave its command to his ambitious brother Agamemnon. And that is how this, after 10 years of bloodshed and constant skirmishes, the siege of Troy resulted in nothing but carnage for the Greeks. The impenetrable tall, and behind them Priam, king of Troy, reliant on the bravery of his eldest son Hector, remained unabated and defeated. During this brutal year, Achilles, the immortal hero of the Greeks, who was himself the son of goddess Thetis, conquered a small island called Crisa and enslaved its population. Among these newly captured people was a beautiful girl named Astinum. Astinum's father of Apollo. Agamemnon demanded the girl for herself and refused every ransom that her father offered for her release. When God Apollo sent a deadly plague that ravaged the Greek army and forced Agamemnon to give Astinum back. Displeased by the turn of events and vengeful vengeful to the girl to Agamemnon in the first place, he compensated himself for this loss by taking another girl named Briseis, who was a treacherous act that upset Achilles so much that he refused to take any further part in the Trojan War. Achilles' mother, Thetis, got a complaint to Zeus about Agamemnon's betrayal and asked the great god to punish him. Zeus in return sent a false dream to Agamemnon and convinced Victorious if he attacked the city's walls with all of his forces in the morning. On the day of battle, first Menelaus, king of Sparta, who had lost, challenged the Trojan prince to a duel. Paris answered the call but failed to defeat Menelaus. When he was about to lose his life, Aphrodite held him back to his room in his father's palace, where he was joined by Helen. Meanwhile, among gods, Zeus argued that Menelaus must be declared war should end as the mortals had agreed before the duel. But Hera, who was still furious at Paris over choosing Aphrodite over her, wanted annihilation of Troy and persuaded Zeus to rekindle the flame of war. Therefore, Athena, disguised as a Trojan soldier, convinced Pandarus to take aim at Menelaus and kill him. However, as Pandarus shot the arrow, Athena deflected it so that it would only wound Menelaus and give war. Following this, the Greek army launched an all-out assault against the Trojans, and a bloody battle started. The Trojans, under the leadership of the Greeks, back to their ships and almost destroyed the Greek camp. Right at this moment, when the Greek army was losing heart, Achilles' best friend Patroclus begged him to join the battle and save the day. Achilles, who was still angry at Agamemnon over kidnapping the girl, refused to fight, but agreed with friend Patroclus so that the Greek soldiers would think Achilles had returned to battle and rally around him. With the arrival of Patroclus in Achilles' disguise quickly changed in favor of the Greeks. The Trojans retreated to the city, and Patroclus pushed forward against the enemy and killed everyone in his way, including Zeus, Sarpedon. Vengeful Zeus decided to kill Patroclus and tasked Apollo with taking revenge for him. Apollo first convinced him, then appeared behind Patroclus and wounded him. When Hector arrived, Patroclus was on his knees, defeated and ready to accept his destiny. Hector ran and finished him off, only to hear Patroclus foretelling Hector's bitter end with his last breath. Achilles wept so loud for his friend that heard his lamentations. She appeared before him and promised him that if he delays his revenge for one day, she will go to the temple of Vulcans and return with for him to defeat Hector. Zeus, fearful of Achilles' rage, summoned the gods to Mount Olympus and asked them to interfere in battle Troy before its time. However, upon arriving on Earth, the gods decided to stand on opposing hills and only witness the battle between the mortals. Attacked the Trojans and destroyed their formation. After a short battle, the entire Trojan army that was camped outside the walls of Troy routed before him. When Hector and Achilles met face to face arrived. Hector at first tried negotiating with Achilles, but the Greek hero did not show any interest in conciliation. He was no match for his opponent, so he ran away and Achilles chased after him. At this moment, Zeus was determined to save Hector, but I forgot that the mortal's life must end. Zeus placed the destiny of both heroes on a golden scale, and when the fate of Hector sank lower, Achilles chased Hector around the city walls 3 times. During Hector's 4th circle around Troy, Athena, disguised as Hector's friend, for him and convinced the Trojan prince that they could defeat Achilles together. At that moment, Hector stopped running and decided to face his enemy. The two engaged in battle. For a while, they fought with spears, and neither one managed to overcome the other. In his last attempt for glory and in a desperate effort, Hector charged Achilles, but he was still wearing Achilles' armor that he took from Patroclus' body. Achilles knew the weakness of the move, put his spear through Hector's throat. King Priam and the rest of the Trojans who were witnessing the final chapter of Hector's life with grief, and the sound of their mourning rose to heavens. After burying his friend Patroclus' body, Achilles held a serious honor. Hector's corpse, however, was dragged behind chariots and stabbed by every Greek soldier. Finally, Apollo asks Zeus to Achilles to return Hector's body to his father. Following Zeus's instructions, King Priam went to Achilles with a chariot full of treasure, begged the Greek hero and asked him to think of the bond between him and his father. Achilles accepted the ransom and gave the body back. The Trojans prepared 9 days for Hector's funeral. On the 10th day, they lit the pyre on fire and mourned the legendary hero. The original epic of the Iliad ends with Hector's death, and all the other stories that you might have heard or read in continuity written later by other writers, especially Virgil, who centuries later wrote his famous sequel to the Iliad titled Aeneid, in which he told the horse, the conquest of Troy, and the death of Achilles. Very well, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing.
So now I hope you understand the summary of Iliad. Let us now move on to the analysis of Iliad. So for the analysis of Iliad, let us first discuss. Let us discuss now the analysis of Iliad. So, although attributed to Homer, the Iliad is clearly dependent on an older oral tradition and may well have been the collective inheritance of many singer poets over a long period of time. The historical fall of Troy is usually dated to around the start of the 12th century BCE. Homer was probably one of the first generation of authors who were also literate, as the Greek alphabet was introduced in the early 8th century BCE, and the language used in his epic poems is an archaic version of Ionic Greek, with admixtures from certain other dialects such as Aeolic Greek. However, it is by no means certain that Homer himself, if in fact such as man ever really existed, actually wrote down the verses. The Iliad was part of a group of ancient poems known as the epic cycle, most of which are now lost to us, which dealt with the history of the Trojan War and the events surrounding it. Whether or not they were written down, we do know that Homer's poems, along with others in the epic cycle, were recited in later days at festivals and ceremonial occasions by professionals singers called rhapsodies, who beat out the measure with rhythm stamps. The Iliad itself does not cover the early events of the Trojan War, which had been launched 10 years before the events described in the poem in order to rescue Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. After her abduction by the Trojan prince Paris, likewise the death of Achilles and the eventual fall of Troy, are not covered in the poem. And these matters are the subjects of other non-Homeric epic cycle poems. So which survive only in fragments. So the Odyssey, a separate work also by Homer, narrates Odysseus' decade-long journey home to Ithaca after the end of the Trojan War. The poem consists of 24 scrolls containing 15,693 lines of dactylic hexameter verse. The entire poem has a formal rhythm that is consistent throughout, making it easier to memorize and yet varied slightly from line to line, preventing it from being monotonous. So many phrases, sometimes whole passages, are repeated verbatim over and over again throughout the Iliad. So, partly to fulfill the demands of the meter and partly as part of the formulaic oral tradition, in the same way, many of the descriptive phrases that are linked with a certain character, such as swift-footed Achilles, Diomedes, and Ida, Diomedes of the great war cry, Hector of the shining helm, and Agamemnon, the lord of men. Match the number of syllables in a hero's name and are repeated regularly to the extent that they almost seem to become part of the characters' names themselves. So the immortal gods and goddesses are portrayed as characters in the Iliad, displaying individuality and will in their actions, but they are also stuck religious figures. Sometimes are often used as a way of explaining how or why an event took place, but they are also sometimes used as comic relief from the war, mimicking, parodying, and mocking mortals. Indeed, it is often the gods, not the mortals, who seem casual, petty, and small-minded. So, for the main theme, of the poem is that of war and peace, and the whole poem is essentially a description of war and fighting. There is a sense of horror and futility built into Homer's chronicle, and yet posed against a viciousness. There is a sense of heroism and glory that adds a glamour to the fighting. So Homer appears both to abhor war and to glorify it. Frequent similes tell of the peacetime efforts back home in Greece and serve as contrast to the war, reminding us of the human values that are destroyed by fighting as well as what is worth fighting for. The concept of heroism and the honor that results from it is also one of the major currents running through the poem. So Achilles in particular represents the heroic code, and his struggle revolves around his belief in an honor system, as opposed to Agamemnon's reliance on a royal privilege. But as fighter after heroic fighter enters the fray in search of honor and is slain before our eyes. The question always remains as to whether their struggle, heroic or not, is really worth the sacrifice. Menin or menis means anger or wrath is the word that opens Iliad. And one of the major themes of the poem is Achilles, coming to terms with his anger, and taking responsibility for his actions and emotions. So now let us move on to the analysis of Odyssey. Again, let us watch now the summary of Odyssey.
Ang bagong Alaska Fortified. 10 pesos SRP lang. Bili na!
The Odyssey is about Odysseus' journey home after the Trojan War. And before the start of the poem, he and the other Greeks laid siege to the city of Troy, located in what's now northwestern Turkey. The war lasted for 10 years. Odysseus and his men got back in their ships and started their trip home to Ithaca, a rocky little island off the Greek mainland, where Odysseus' wife and son are waiting for him. Several dangerous obstacles, and all of Odysseus' men die. Odysseus survives because of his intelligence and cunning, the qualities he's renowned for. And he eventually makes money. The story breaks roughly into three parts. The first part doesn't really even involve Odysseus. It's more about what's going on in Ithaca with his wife and son while he's gone. So what happened to Odysseus in the 8 years since he left Troy. And in the final part, we finally see Odysseus return home. The poem opens with two gods, Zeus and his fate. Odysseus is stuck on an island in the middle of the sea, in the house of a nymph named Calypso. Calypso won't let Odysseus leave. But even if he could lead Odysseus off course as he tries to make it home, Poseidon is mad at Odysseus because Odysseus blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Athena says they should be allowed to leave. Then Poseidon can't really argue since he's outnumbered. They should dispatch Hermes to tell Calypso to let Odysseus go. And in the meantime, she'll go visit Odysseus. Disguised as a man, Athena goes to Odysseus' home in Ithaca. Telemachus thinks she's just a stranger at first and invites her in for some food and wine. Though he figures out Athena. He laments that he'll never see his father and complains about all the nobles from nearby islands who are courting his mother, since everyone assumes Odysseus is dead. Doesn't want to marry someone else, but she doesn't want to tell her suitors to leave either. So they just hang around Odysseus' house all day and eat all the food. Athena prophesies, and she counsels Telemachus to round up all the suitors in the morning and order them to leave. Then he should get a ship ready and visit King Nestor in Pylos and King Menelaus and Spartacus is alive. He should wait another year for Odysseus to return. But if he learns Odysseus is dead, he should make a grave for him and give his mother to one of the suitors. Suggested. He gets up and says that not only has he lost his father, but now these suitors are eating all his family's food and drinking all the wine. One of the suitors, Antinous, will be upset. It's Penelope who's to blame. She's been leading the suitors on for almost 4 years, saying she'll choose one to marry as soon as she finishes weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus. She weaves her out each day, but at night she unravels her work, and the suitors found out. Telemachus says he'll never force his mother to choose a husband and leave their house. He announces he's in Sparta and Pylos. Athena helps him get a ship and crew together, and she disguises herself as an old friend of Odysseus's, named Mentor. When they arrive, Nestor, who fought at Troy with Odysseus. Nestor says he hasn't seen or heard from Odysseus since just after they left Troy. He agrees to help Telemachus get to Sparta. Telemachus takes a chariot and goes with Nestor's son, Pisistratus, to Sparta. In Sparta, a big wedding feast is underway as they arrive, and they join Menelaus for some talk. Menelaus' wife, Helen, recognizes Telemachus as Odysseus' son. She tells the story of how, during the Trojan War, Odysseus dressed up as a beggar for information to take back to the Greeks. She orders the servants to prepare beds for Telemachus and Pisistratus. The next morning, Menelaus tells Telemachus that the he got while stranded on a small island off the coast of Egypt. When he left Troy, he didn't make the appropriate sacrifices to the gods, so the gods marooned him on a little island called. Men were running out of food when Menelaus met a goddess named Iodothea, the daughter of Proteus. She told him if he could pin and hold Proteus, Proteus would answer any. With Iodothea's help, Menelaus and his men snuck up on Proteus. As soon as he fell asleep, Menelaus jumped on him. Proteus transformed into different gold, but Iodothea warned he would do this, and Menelaus kept him in a tight squeeze until he tired out. The first question Menelaus asked is what happened to his Greek comrade, him about a few of the Greeks, including Odysseus. He saw a vision of Odysseus on an island, crying in the house of the nymph Calypso. Calypso was keeping him there by force, for any means of getting away. That was the last Menelaus heard of Odysseus. Meanwhile, two of the suitors, Antinous and Eurymachus, come up with a plot to kill Telemachus with the ship and ambush him. But Medon, the herald, overhears the scheme and tells Penelope. She prays to Athena to save Telemachus, and Athena hears her. They compromise and agree that Odysseus can go home, but that he'll have to suffer more along the way. Zeus sends Hermes to give Calypso the news. Calypso finds Odysseus sitting. He hardly believes at first that he's being allowed to leave, and he makes Calypso promise it's not some scheme to harm him. She swears an oath, and they go back to Calypso's cave, where they make. For the rest of the story, continue on to part 2 of the Odyssey video Spark Note. For more information about the Odyssey, check out the
I'm sorry to unmute my mic. So let us now move on to the um, analysis of Odyssey. So Odyssey is an Homer's epic poem that tells the story of Odysseus' 10-year struggle to return home to Ithaca after the Trojan War. In Odysseus' absence, his wife Penelope is plagued by the suitors who have been eating Odysseus' food and destroying his estate. Penelope holds them off by slyly refusing to remarry until she finishes a weaving that she unwinds every night. So what are the Odyssey summary key points? So these are the Odysseus' son Telemachus sneaks off the island to find his father. Menelaus tells him that Odysseus is being held captive by Calypso. Meanwhile, the suitors plan to kill Telemachus. The second one, Athena intervenes to free Odysseus from Calypso. When an angry Poseidon wrecks Odysseus' raft, he swims to the island of the Phaeacians. There he recounts his adventures since the Trojan War, describing his encounters with Circe and the Cyclops. The Phaeacians help Odysseus return home. Once in Ithaca, he disguises himself as a beggar and plans his revenge. With the help of Telemachus, Odysseus kills Penelope's suitors, at long last. At long last, Penelope and Odysseus are reunited. Excuse me. So for the meter and style in the Odyssey, so the Greek text of the Odyssey, as we have, it is written predominantly in dactylic hexameter, like the story of Iliad. Each line consists of 6 metrical feet, each of which consists of a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. By no means are dactyls used exclusively. In fact, the last foot of every line usually ends in either a spondee, which means 2 stressed syllables, or a trochee, which means 1 stressed syllable, followed by 1 unstressed syllable. So spondees frequently replace dactyls in other parts of certain lines as well. So Homer's style is famous for its flow and pacing. It is easy to follow and meant to be read. Unlike much modern poetry, which is designed to be read carefully one line at a time, there are a wealth of details in descriptions. Unlike other contemporary writings such as the Bible, which are reticent on all details but the most essential. Characterization is strong in Homer's writing. Each character, large or small, is a distinctive individual with independent motivations. On the other hand, character development over the course of the narrative is minimal. Characters are what they are, and changes in personality are usually insignificant. Finally, one should not be surprised by the frequent use of formulaic repetition and contextually and seemingly epithets, for Homer's narratives are the product of oral development, and these ingredients were essential to the spontaneous composition of oral poetry. So that is for my report for the Lesson 2 Mythology of Ancient Greece and Rome, the analysis of Iliad and Odyssey. Thank you for listening.